And I'm calling to order the regular Board of Education meeting for Indian Prairie School District 204 on Monday, February 23rd, 2026. Michelle, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Deming. Present. Ms. Donahue.
Here.
Ms. Gentz.
Here.
Ms. Fosdick.
Here.
Ms. Grover. Mr. Rising. And Mr. Karubas.
Here.
Mr. Karubas, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next regular board meeting will be held on Monday, March 9th. We have 6 board salutes tonight. We'll start with Ms. Gentz.
All right, I have 2. 2026 Career and Technical Education Instructor of the Year. The board salutes Waubonsie Valley High School television production teacher Brian Weinsick for being awarded the 2026 Career and Technical Education Instructor of the Year. Brian was selected by District 204 in partnership with the DuPage Area Occupational Education System and the College of DuPage in recognition of his excellence, innovative teaching strategies, and steadfast commitment to advocating for career and technical education. Congratulations to Brian on receiving this award. Granger Middle School student wins DuPage County Regional Spelling Bee. The board salutes Shruti Ayagari, an 8th grader at Granger Middle School, for winning the DuPage County Regional Spelling Bee and advancing to the Scripps National Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C. This marks her 2nd consecutive year winning the regional event. We also recognize Scullin Middle School 7th grader Sachin Jabshedi and Crone Middle School 7th grader Kiara Katari for their impressive achievement and participation in this year's Regional Spelling Bee. Congratulations to all.
Mr. Karubas.
Waubonsie Valley gymnast heading to state. The board salutes Waubonsie Valley senior gymnast Lucia Caruso for advancing to the state competition in the floor exercise for the 2nd consecutive season. Competing for the Valley Co-op at the Oswego Girls Gymnastics Sectional, Lucia earned a first-place finish on the floor exercise, securing her return to state. We congratulate her and wish her continued success there.
Ms. Fosdick.
District 204 staff member recognized at the state level. The board salutes Laura Gonzalez, Colishall Elementary K-5 multilingual learners teacher, on her nomination and election as board secretary of the Illinois State Board of Education. Elected by the Education Policy Planning Committee meeting of the whole, this leadership role is a great achievement and shows her dedication. Congratulations.
Ms. Grover.
District 204 students represented at Illinois Career and Technical Education. The board salutes Waubonsie Valley Junior Ikanch Mahapatra and Nikwa Valley Seniors Debanshi Day and Asta Jindal for representing Indian Prairie School District 204 at the Illinois Career and Technical Education Career Connected Learning Gaining Momentum presentation. As Career and Technical Student Organization student board members, they spoke with confidence, clarity, and professionalism, proudly representing our district at the state level. Congratulations on this great achievement.
Ms. Dumming.
Brooks Elementary 4th grader receives Aurora Black Girl Magic Award. The board salutes Brooks Elementary 4th grader Courtney Stovall for being awarded the inaugural City of Aurora Black Girl Magic Award. When she was just 7 years old, Courtney published her book, Vacation Diary of a Sloth, showing her creativity, determination, and talent at a young age. Congratulations, Courtney.
Let's have an applause for all of these great accomplishments. Okay, next we have our student representative report by Avery Powers from Metea Valley High School.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Avery Powers, and I will be the Executive Board Representative from Metea Valley High School next year, and I am here tonight filling in for Soha. First, we're going to start off with general updates. The chess team had a 5-2 record at state, and speech team sent 8 students to state this past weekend, with the Mustangs finishing in 13th place out of 73 teams. BPA and DECA are sending students to state in the next 2 weeks as well. For Black History Month, Black Aces put on a great showcase students could watch during their lunch period. Later this month, Metea is doing a school-wide polar plunge event. We have over 30 staff members raising money and taking a plunge to represent their clubs and sports. We also have several students participating as well. Moving on to athletics, girls bowling had 2 athletes qualify for sectionals, and 2 athletes for girls wrestling and 1 athlete for boys wrestling also advanced to sectionals. Trey Watkins set the all-time basketball scoring record at Metea with around 1,250 points throughout his career. Boys swim sectionals took place on Saturday, and multiple athletes are moving on. Dance and cheer team both finished out their seasons, and the dance team had their winter showcase last Thursday. Spring sports started with softball tryouts today, and all other spring sports starting within the next 2 weeks. Finally, we have fine arts. Metea music students had the opportunity to work with several guest clinicians. Orchestra students worked with Ray Oswald, a retired music educator. Choir students worked with Catherine Sherman of DePaul University and Professor Sarah Catt of Elmhurst University. Band students worked with Jim Sombers, a retired music educator and Birch Creek director, and Lieutenant Colonel Brian Miller, commander of the Air National Guard Band of the Midwest. Metea also got the opportunity to host solo and ensemble this past weekend. That's all for our report this evening. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to updating you on all the great things at Metea in the future. And as always, go Mustangs.
Thank you. Welcome, Avery. Okay, next we have our school spotlight, and tonight is Gail McKinzie High School, presented by LaTanya Harris.
Good evening, everyone. Oh, the table. Oh, I gotta work. Good evening. How you guys doing? Okay, so what we did this semester, we called it a gratitude journaling. It was an idea my psychologist and I thought about, and we actually put it into motion this semester. So just want to talk about it, talk about the highlights of the program and things like that. So it began as a simple idea, create structure, space for reflection. It's become a level of connection, equity, and post-secondary readiness. Today I will briefly share the framework, the strategy, and the impact. And so I just called it the Power of the Page, SEL, in action. There we go. So the framework, we did it consistently. We did it on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9:45. Everyone was involved in it, and it was a built-in prompt that we used in Google Classroom, so everyone was in that Google Classroom. It was access for all. We were able to get students journals. You can't hear me? Oh. We were able to get students journals and things with our SEL grant-funded money and materials like that. Students had the opportunity, they could write or they could draw, so they kind of took, away from people who don't want to write or express themselves in a different manner. And so the journals remained in the building. The students didn't take the journals home because we did it in 4th period all the time, so the teachers kept the journals in the building. And then staff participated as well. So the strategic alignment was vocational readiness, strengths, interests, post-secondary goals, equity and inclusion, identity and belonging, SEO development like grants, gratitude, regulation, self-awareness. And then this was the gratitude tree. And this gratitude tree was around Thanksgiving from the journal prompt. It was a journal prompt, like, what are you grateful for? So they were given leaves instead of to write on. And so then one of the students and staff put the leaves and trees up. And so student engagement and the impact, it increased engagement throughout creative expression, stronger student-staff connection, because the staff were being transparent by, journaling as well. Noticeable calm during journaling blocks. It was definitely a reset for everybody. And then impact and next steps. We didn't just teach them to write. We were able to teach them to reflect, regulate, and plan for who they want to become. And then the goal is just to expand vocational milestone prompts and align with graduation transition planning.
Thank you so much for sharing this. It's a very great skill and opportunity for students to try something new, and it sounds like it was really welcomed and appreciated by everyone. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Quick question. That looks like a great program. It's very creative. Do you plan on doing it next year and going to make any changes?
We haven't thought about that. We haven't thought about what we would do next year, but we could expand it. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
no
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, it is now time for public comment, and 60 minutes is allowed. Each person is limited to 3 minutes. When addressing the board, we ask that you respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. We also ask that those addressing the board be cognizant that this is an open meeting and is available to all age groups, and as such, ask that you consider who the audience members are this evening and keep comments age appropriate. Public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. There will be no feedback from the board members during the meeting, but follow-up will be provided by an administrator as appropriate. Although this is not required, it is helpful for the board to know whether the comments and concerns we hear are being raised by residents. So we ask that you state if you live in the district and if you currently have children in our schools. Tonight we have 4 speakers. The first is Christina Garcia.
My name is Christina Garcia. I'm a Aurora resident and parent of 2 students in the district. I'm here to speak on the district's equity initiative, or more accurately, the lack of it at Fisher Middle School. Our equity framework promises to address systematic barriers, but equity isn't just a slogan, it's a standard of treatment. When the rules change the moment a student walks into a different building, that isn't equity, it's injustice. We're currently seeing a double standard that suggests some students deserve grace and support, while other students deserve compliance and punishment. Look at the recent peaceful protests at Waubonsee High School. The administration supported their students' right to assembly. The results, 0 consequences. Our experience for our middle schoolers was a complete betrayal of our district's equity promise. 2 days before the walkout, the district sent an email discouraging participation and threatening consequences. At Fisher, those threats were realized, met with warnings, 1-day detention, and 2-day detention. But the punishment didn't stop there. Those students were forced to write reflective writing prompts mandating why they should have done it differently, how the peaceful protests damaged the Falcon pride. This isn't restorative practices. This is designed to shame the student voices. When I asked for the disciplinary rubric used to justify these specific detentions, the Fisher administration flatly refused to provide it. This approach is particularly devastating when you look at who it affects. 32.8% of Fisher students identify as Hispanic. My own son, who's multiracial, white and Mexican American, falls into the 5.7 of 2 or more races. Rather than supporting the largest minority in the building, the administration has turned its back, choosing to implement multi-layer system of punishment rather than restorative supports they promise. This isn't just about a single protest. It's about a pattern of discriminatory enforcement our children witness on a daily. The data is undeniable. Fisher, Hispanic and Black children face twice the number of in-school and out-of-school detentions compared to their white peers. When a student sees a peer participate in a peaceful protest without facing the same consequence they did, their trust in the system is destroyed. It teaches them rules are arbitrary and biased, and the Falcon pride is just a slogan. It doesn't apply to the very people in charge of protecting them. We need a consistent handbook that mandates consistency for every middle school student. True equity in the district cannot exist as long as the handbook allows for this subjective discipline we're seeing today. Until there's a clear, transparent, equally applied rubric for all, Equity framework remains a broken promise. I urge the board to ensure fairness is a right for all students, not for a few privileged. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next speaker is Kristen Pierce.
Good evening. My name is Kristen Pierce, and I'm the parent of a student at Longwood Elementary. I want to start by saying how much I appreciate the opportunities Mr. Zeman has created for parents to share their concerns, both individually and in group settings. That openness matters. I also want to be very clear that I think highly of the staff at Longwood. Our teachers and administrators are doing the very best they can with the resources they have. Longwood is a diverse school, and that diversity is a strength. But it also comes with real challenges that cannot be ignored. With the district average for low-income students around 18%, Longwood's population is closer to 48%. Although Title I funding is appreciated, it does not fully address the scope of what the school is facing day to day. Our teachers are managing an extraordinary amount. They regularly deal with dangerous and disrespectful behavior, often without the level of support these situations require. Looking at the data, Longwood's teacher retention rate for 2025 is 74%. Just 5 years ago, it was above 83%, and in 2022, it was nearly 88%. Meanwhile, the district average today is 93.8%. That means Longwood is not only below the district average, but has experienced a steady decline in retention. That gap is significant. In addition, 20.4% of Longwood's teachers are considered novice, meaning they have less than 2 years of experience. The district average is just 3.9%. Nearly 1 in 5 teachers at Longwood are new to their profession. These are dedicated educators who deeply care about their students, but when a school serving one of the highest needs populations also has the lowest retention and the highest concentration of novice teachers, it raises serious concerns about stability and equity. Last year, my daughter had a first-year teacher. She was and still is an excellent educator, and I cannot speak highly enough of her dedication and care for her students. However, despite her efforts, the classroom environment was frequently chaotic. My daughter witnessed desks being flipped, garbage cans kicked and thrown, excessive profanity, repeated classroom removals, and ongoing disruptive behavior. Over time, desks were removed entirely and replaced with tables to manage the situation. I ask you to pause and consider this. Is this the learning environment we would want for any of our children on a daily basis? There's a lot of discussion about equity across schools in the district, but Longwood does not appear to experience that equity in practice. When I tell other parents my child attends Longwood, the reaction is often, "Oh, how is it there?" That perception matters, and it is shaping decisions families are making. What makes this especially difficult is that I also speak with neighbors who had children attend Longwood years ago, children who have now aged out of the district. They consistently talk about their experience with pride. They describe a strong sense of community, stability, and a school they felt confident sending their children to each day. That makes the current perception even more concerning. Longwood was once viewed as a great school. My hope is that with the right support,
Ms.
staffing...
Donahue, the speaker time has ended.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The next speaker is Ginger Evers.
I've got a poster for you guys after that. Hi, my name is Ginger Evers, and I have 3 students in District 204, 2 of which attend Neuqua Valley High School at the main building. I'm here today to talk about a very serious safety concern that I have with Neuqua Valley High School. My oldest son is a senior, and he was in a car accident on Wildcat Way about 10 days ago. While I don't plan to go into the specifics about the accident to protect everyone's privacy, I do want to share with the school board what I learned from the accident. See, my son kept saying the day of the accident and the following morning that he didn't understand what he had done wrong. And it wasn't until I witnessed the traffic flow occurring on Wildcat Way that I understood why. The current setup of Wildcat Way encourages confusion for drivers. It also encourages the violation of rules of the road in the state of Illinois. Wildcat Way is a 2-lane road that intersects with 95th Street. It runs southbound towards the school and northbound away from the school. Students are the primary users of this road, as it is how multiple student parking lots are accessed. Specifically, students can access either the athletic parking lot or the football stadium parking lot, or they can continue on behind the building. This particular safety issue can really only be seen during the morning when students are arriving at school, as the issue is with the design of the southbound lane on Wildcat Way. Again, Wildcat Way is a 2-lane road. When headed southbound into the school from 95th Street, Wildcat Way is initially a single lane. After a few hundred feet, it is widened. Where the road is widened, the 2 yellow lines dividing the road create a pseudo left turn lane. I say pseudo because the lines jut out at an angle and are painted in a way that could suggest to someone, especially a new driver, that a turn lane is being created. What is happening in the morning is some of these drivers who are turning left into the athletic school parking lot scoot over. There is then just enough room for drivers who are turning right into the football stadium parking lot or continuing on ahead to create a second lane. The widening of this road is causing us a lot of issues. The problem in Illinois is that it's illegal to pass someone on the right within 100 feet of an intersection. It's also illegal to pass another vehicle at a pedestrian crosswalk. I want to repeat this. It's illegal, according to the rules of the road in Illinois, for someone to pass another vehicle on the right within 100 feet of an intersection or at a pedestrian crosswalk. Yet this is happening on a daily basis at Neuqua Valley, and the lane markings on Wildcat Way are encouraging this behavior, and no one at Neuqua is doing anything about it.
Ms. Donahue, the speaker's time has ended.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Alicia Smith.
Hello, my name is Alicia Smith. I grew up in the district. I taught for 13 years in the district. I'm a resident of the district. The Fisher walkout, according to the handbook, is a level 2 offense. But calling someone a racial slur or an orientation slur or derogatory name at Fisher, according to the handbook, is a level 1 offense. So a child that I love who participated in the walkout got disciplined with a 2-day detention versus his first time at Fisher Middle School this year was called a black slur in November, was called a derogatory name in December, and was called an orientation slur last month. Those 3 different students in 3 different classes who said those harmful words to him only have a level 1 offense, where he did not harm anyone and he has a level 2 offense. Also, like the speaker before me said, part of the issues going on at Fisher, part of the issues going on at Longwood, part of the issues going on at Georgetown is what I have talked to the school board about time and time again. They're systemic. They're systemic, and they are created partly by the board. You have way too many low-income students above the district average in those schools. Then you feed all of Georgetown and 2 other low-income title schools into Fisher, where the overwhelming needs are not able to be met by the resources in the building, which is what the previous speaker said about Longwood, which is very true about Georgetown, where I worked there for 6 years. And any Georgetown teacher can tell you that. And then you have 3 title schools getting fed into Fisher, and it's a wonder why these issues are happening. Why a 6th grader who is coming to middle school for the first time gets to experience that. And then you want to tout restorative justice. How do you do restorative justice for that? Why don't you come home and you can tell him how restorative justice works in that situation, which has happened to him 3 times. Please stop promoting systemic inequities in the district and really start to look at what is causing the inequities at Longwood, Georgetown, McCarty, and Fisher, because it is not safe for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we now move to our consent agenda and superintendent report. We will begin with the superintendent report. Dr. Talley.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue, members of the Board of Education and Indian Prairie community. As I mentioned at the last Board of Education meeting, we will have our 4th annual Mental Health Symposium on Saturday, March the 7th at Metea High School. We currently have more than 350 people signed up for the symposium. You can find information on our website about the event. We will have a keynote for adults and for the first time a keynote for students. We are pleased that Naperville 203, Oswego, and East Aurora school districts are working with us on this event. We are also thankful for the following companies and agencies for helping to sponsor our event. Our silver sponsors at $2,500 include Endeavor Health, Behavioral Health, Linden Oaks Hospital, Reliable Home Improvement, and Dooley Health and Care. Our bronze sponsors at $1,000, East Mover Credit Union, Grow Wellness Group and Grow Wellness Foundation, and Authentic Growth Wellness Group. And our friend sponsors of $500, Naperville Park District and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, Illinois. Finally, we thank Indian Prairie Education Foundation for their donation of $10,500 in support of the symposium. Part of that funding came from the Naperville City Social Services Grant. We would not be able to have this event without the help of all of these sponsors. Parents are asked to complete their School 5 Essential surveys. Survey results are an important part of school improvement process. Data from the surveys help each school's administration understand what is going well in the school and where they can improve. For a school to receive results, however, a school must have 20% of its parents complete the surveys. You should have received information about the surveys from your child's school as well as from our weekly email. Though we still have a few weeks to go, I want to applaud White Eagle, Longwood, and Graham for having more than 20% of their parents completing the surveys. Sitting right there at the line is Springbrook with 19% of parents completing the survey. Remember, surveys must be completed by March 13th. Ms. Donahue, I'll return it back to you.
Okay, I now need a motion for the approval of consent agenda items D through H.
I move that the Board of Education approve consent agenda items D through H as presented.
Any discussion? Okay, Michelle, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Gentz,
Yes.
Ms. Grover, Ms. Donahue,
Yes.
Ms. Fosdick,
Yes.
Mr. Karubas,
Yes.
and Ms. Deming.
The motion passes. Now we will have a presentation from Matt Shipley regarding the financial forecast presentation.
All right. Good evening, members of the Board of Education. As mentioned, I'm here tonight to present our 5-year forecast presentation. This is sort of an annual tradition to be in front of the board here in late February, presenting the highest level that we will go into our budget and long-range financial planning annually. This tends to be one of our longer discussions. I think last year we clocked in right at 2 hours, so I'll try and go a little faster this year. I need you to do your part too. So tonight's presentation is in line with strategic plan priority number 4 and board policy 4.10.
You will note Mr. Rising is not here, so that might help.
We're starting with a little head start, so let's keep going. All right. So tonight, before we start looking forward and looking into the future years, I think it's important to kind of take a step back and look at how we finished out the prior year and also how we were doing year to date with our budget to actual summaries. We'll then go into our operating revenues 5-year forecast, touch a little bit about operating expenditures and sort of our plan and proposal for operating expenditures moving forward. No graphs or charts related to operating expenses tonight. That was intentional. We didn't miss a slide or miss an opportunity for another chart in this. But really, administration was excited to really take a little different spin on the operating expenses and have a little different discussion this evening. We're going to cover our non-operating funds, which is primarily the funds as a result of our Safer, Stronger 204 referendum. And then, of course, we'll have time for summarizing, next steps, and any board questions. So again, first we're going to start with looking at our operating funds. As a reminder, all our financial reporting is done in accordance with State Board of Education requirements, which designate 6 funds as operating funds for the district. The 3 primary funds are Education, Operations, Maintenance, and Transportation Fund. This also includes smaller funds such as the IMRF fund, working cash, and tort liability. These are the funds that focus on the day-to-day operations of the districts, both from a revenue and expense perspective. And these funds were not directly impacted by the November 2024 Safer, Stronger 204 referendum. And so, as mentioned, this is how we did kind of our prior year actual results compared to what we budgeted for the prior year. These results have been finalized and been through our audit process. They've been filed with the State Board of Education right around Christmas time. And so these are our final numbers for all our actual revenues and actual expenses. And really, we showed these numbers and some of these trends at this time last year, and really those trends held as we went into the spring of 2025 and finished the year. And so in general, what we saw is favorable budget variance on the revenue side of almost $7 million, really coming across all main revenue categories. But a lot of these are temporary revenues or one-time revenues. And what we saw is expenditures also over budget, again, compared to an over $400 million budget, over by a relatively small amount, about 1.5%. But a lot of these expenditures had the potential or have the potential to represent recurring expenditures. And so while we were able to cover those variances last year and still come out with a balanced budget, this really put us in motion to really review expenditure trends and identify what was causing some of these variances. Some of the main challenges last year were that we were 13 FTE above budget. That really was the result of some hirings we had to do in the fall to prepare for some unexpected class size increases or higher enrollment than we anticipated, as well as some specific special education needs. We continued to see some challenges in our purchase services department, also related to some special education services we provide through a contractual service relationship. And then we also did see some increase in supplies as well. That really represented a variety of things, but digital softwares and licenses and subscriptions is one item that we're really starting to identify is running above budget both last year and this year. So overall, we saw this variance, and that really put in motion what we tried to do with the current budget for 25-26, the year that we're a little more than halfway through as of today. So this was the 2026 operating budget that we passed in August. You will see we did project a slight excess, and we projected a fund balance of revenue of 34.4%, so right in line with what our board's fund balance policy was, or a little bit above that 25% threshold. These budget line items, if you were to compare them to the prior slide, you'll see that we kind of met in the middle a little bit with some of these expenditures. So we recognize some of those expenditure trends, but also set some targets to kind of reduce from prior year actuals as part of this budget. And that leads us to where we are kind of period to date. So what's shown here is our current year actuals through January 31st. It actually compares that to the prior year to date, so that you can kind of see that comparison like for like where we are year to date. But then it takes that current year actual and adds sort of a 5-month projection for the remaining 5 months of the year to get to that year-end projection column. And then from that year-end projection column, we're able to compare that to budget and again, see kind of where we're trending, where we expect to end the year. And so kind of a combination of mixed news here to share. In general, we're more in line with budget than where we were at this time last year, but we do still have some challenges in the expense area that we're working through. So you'll notice a negative or unfavorable variances in that purchase services line of about just short of $1.5 million. That's related to special education transportation. Again, similar to last year where we had some things come up at the last minute in the support services or special education area. We similarly had some special education transportation needs, specifically around the needs of expanded use of bus aids, expanded use of additional adult support on those routes. And that's become a real challenging cost center to manage for us. Again, that supplies and materials category is trending above budget too, and as mentioned earlier, that's really that license and software subscription category that's continuing to trend above. So we continue to manage both those categories. We did, for the transportation, for example, and we did some mid-year route changes and some fairly significant rerouting of our buses, which ended up saving several $100,000. So these are things we're actively managing, but did want to make the board and the community aware that these are areas where we're trending above budget. Again, a little difference from last year because we do not have as many favorable variances on the revenue side. This does equate to closer to a balanced budget or even a slight deficit than where we were trending last year. Hopefully, as we continue to manage expenditures and manage to the next 5 months, we can bring that closer in line to budget. But as of today, we are showing that slight deficit for the current year. So with that kind of our basis as we look forward, we're going to transition into that 5-year look forward for revenues. Just starting here, just a reminder of how our revenues break down between those major categories. A reminder, our revenue makeup has stayed consistent for 10 plus years, with property taxes being the overwhelming source of our revenues, coming in at 77%. So I think sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about those other pieces of the pie, but the reality shown here is that property taxes continues to be the overwhelming majority of our revenues. So we'll just start here kind of showing the historical trend and going back to 2018, 2018 all the way to 2030, so showing a 10-plus year look at total revenues here, both kind of a simple chart as well as more of a graph form. We're going to go back to 2018 for all revenues this evening, and we're going to do that for a couple reasons. The first is that it does kind of take us prior to COVID, so we can kind of see the impact of some of those COVID years. Show that in general we're kind of coming back and fully back in line with historical trends. The second reason 2018 is an important year, and we'll get to this a little bit more in the state discussion, but that's the first year of evidence-based funding. So again, by going back to 2018, we're able to really to really say, okay, how is our overall revenue picture, how has our state revenue changed as a result of that evidence-based funding passing in 2018. But again, staying here with revenues for a second, you'll see that gradual growth. Again, that shouldn't be surprising. Our property tax revenue does have an allowance to grow by the Consumer Price Index each year. And then you'll see also the percent increase we've shown, which is shown in that orange line there. So again, getting back more in line with historical trends after a couple years where it was in the 5 to 6% range. Again, that was coming out of COVID. That was as a result of some of those large Consumer Price Index numbers we saw in 21 and 22. This is a fairly involved slide, and I won't read it to you this evening, but just wanted to provide a table that we've provided in the past, which really references all the key drivers of that property tax revenue, both for what the district receives, but also what the impact of that property tax levy is on our taxpayers. So going down the left, you'll see kind of 5 key assumptions. You'll see what assumption range we're making for that assumption over the next 5 years, as well as the impact that has on both the district operating revenue as well as on our current taxpayers. So most of these do have further detail that we'll get into in a minute. One item I'll point out, because I think it's been a couple years since we've really talked about it at the board level, is that TIF distribution line. So as a reminder, we do have a couple TIFs in our district. TIFs in K-12 education in Illinois kind of is a dirty word. But we are fortunate that within our 2 TIFs, we have an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Aurora, which does offer us some protection from the challenges that TIFs often represent to school districts. So at a high level, when a TIF is formed, that limits the amount of property growth that our property tax levy can access within that TIF. The intention of this is generally that a city declares an area blighted or in need of redevelopment that otherwise wouldn't be possible without that incentive. And as a result, that kind of locks the district out of accessing any sort of future property tax growth from that area. Through our negotiations and relationship with the city of Aurora, we were able to get some protection with the 2 TIFs that are in our district, and really in two key areas. One, we've reduced the length of those TIFs from 23 years to 15 years, and they cannot be renewed without school district consent or without school district negotiations. And then the second key way we were able to sort of protect the district is to the extent those TIFs do generate residential housing, we do receive a payment for that in full. And so with the first TIF being the Fox Valley Mall area, or what's kind of known as the inner circle of the mall, we do now have residential housing coming online from that mall. We will start receiving that revenue from the city of Aurora. And so again, those are two key protections that are going to limit the impact of that TIF on our district going forward. Again, 15 years is shorter than 23, but it still takes us out to 2034 or 2035. So we still have a while before we could start accessing the growth in that commercial EAV within that TIF, but we will start receiving those payments tied to the residential portion of that TIF. So as already mentioned, really the main driver of that revenue tied to property taxes is the consumer price index. We're able to increase our levy by the lesser of 5% or CPI each year. Again, you'll see that we are predicting closer to stable CPIs. So again, coming down from a level in 2021 and 2022, we were in the 6-7 range with CPI. Somebody got it. Okay, so coming down more into the traditional range, we see it being a little bit above 2%. And a reminder, those CPI amounts do lag. So the CPI that we already know for calendar years 24 and 25, those will drive really the next up to the next 2 years. We already kind of know where our property tax revenue is headed. The next key driver then is the amount of new property. So current taxpayers kind of receive the increase tied to the consumer price index, and then after that sort of calculation happens, we're able to add on any new commercial or residential property onto that tax levy each year. Again, shown here going back several years is sort of the annual new property allotment. And you'll see we're expecting the current levy to have a significant amount of new property tied to it, and then an amount that is probably slightly above where we've been over historical trend, but a little bit more in line. And then the chart here, kind of in green and yellow, is really what some of those anticipated properties are. So one of the good things that we have with the district is in relationships with all our municipalities, we have really good relationships to kind of understand what commercial properties are coming on board over the next couple of years, what residential properties are being considered. Both our municipalities value our input on both those development types as well. And so we are able to have a pretty good understanding of what to expect going forward. And so I'll just point up a few here. We have several developments in the commercial side that we will be coming online here for property tax payments in the next couple of years. And then in that 3 to 5 years area, we are, that's a little bit further out. It's a little bit more conceptual at this time, but we are having discussions with the city of Naperville on their plans for the I-88 corridor. That probably represents the most significant opportunity we have for commercial development in that 3 to 5 year range. So one of the things on that last slide you may have noticed is that we're listing some properties, some things that are already up and running and have been for a while. As new property still within that 1 to 3 year horizon. And so if you looked at that and saw Block 59 and said, well, I've driven by it, the parking lot's always packed, I've gone to Cheesecake Factory, we've had Stan's Donuts in the district several times, why are we still not receiving property tax revenue for that district? Why is that still listed as new property? And so what's shown here is kind of the reality of that commercial development, that just like that CPI factor, it can lag up to 2 years when new property is built or constructed or when new commercial development's open, and when we actually start seeing that revenue. And so I think the Block 59 is a great example of being able to show that concept. You'll see that you go back to 2023 is when the city council first sort of approved or supported that business district. Discussions actually predated that. I think as a district, we actually issued a letter of support for the concept back in 2022. And so you'll see from that approval, on forward, we started seeing restaurants open in the early 2025, definitely saw significant growth throughout the summer and fall of 25. But we're still looking at June of 2027 really being the first time we're going to see significant property tax dollars from that development. So overall, when you take this concept and you kind of take it at the 30,000 foot view or look at the district level, we can have great relationships with our cities. We can know what's coming from both the commercial and residential side. The reality is that the timing of new property and understanding when these developments will really create property tax dollars continues to be a little bit of an estimate or a challenge to predict. Finally, for property taxes, just wanted to kind of show two charts or images kind of right next to each other and talk through kind of the dichotomy that this shows. And so, on the one side, we're showing a chart that shows about a 20-year history of our property tax rate, and you'll see we're at a point where our property tax rate is at the lowest it's been in that period. So going all the way back to 2008. So for the taxpayer, that represents good news. That represents that the dollars they're paying in property taxes relative to the value of their property is the lowest it has been, again, in a generation. But the second chart talks about a property tax burden shift or a shift of how those dollars are being received by the district. And so this is sort of the, while we have good news on the rate, this does represent a challenge for our taxpayers. And so what's kind of shown here is that we know what's really driving that lower rate throughout the district is an increase in housing values. So we've seen residential properties, the value of those grow significantly, really, again, coming out of that COVID period. Our EAV is kind of a lagging indicator, so it's still trying to catch up as it's valuing those properties. And as a result, that's driving that rate lower. At the same time, commercial property hasn't seen that same level of growth, and in some sectors, it's even declined a little bit. And so as residential property values growing, commercial staying stagnant, and that's shifting tax burden from commercial properties onto residents. So again, what that means is that property tax burden, even though it's at a lower rate, it's a more total dollars are coming from our residents as opposed to commercial property. Again, given the size of the district and the number of properties involved, it can be a little difficult to estimate the to estimate the actual dollar impact or come up with a dollar figure of this. But what I've been able to estimate or what I've been able to see is that we've gone from having about commercial property representing about 20 or 21% of our properties down to about 18%. So again, that's a significant shift when you're talking about 3% of your total property tax base shifting from commercial industrial onto residents in a relatively short period of time. So after talking about property taxes, again, being our largest financial source, we're going to move to the second largest, which is the state of Illinois. And this always tends to be where we start getting a little bit of heartburn in the presentation. Just wanted to summarize here what sort of the state of Illinois' financial picture was leading into budget discussions. And so this is really just meant to be a snapshot of what was being reported in the news about the state of Illinois' finances over the past several months. So first, leading into the budget presentation that the governor gave last week, there was a projected $2.2 billion deficit, driven both by structural imbalances as well as uncertainty over federal funding. Shown next is kind of the current bond ratings of the state, and on their face they may look good. You see A minus. I think bond rating agencies were the first victims of grade inflation, because those really are only 3 notches above junk grade. So those are considered to be medium grade ratings. And again, just a couple notches in the state would actually be closer to junk territory. As a reminder, Indian Prairie has a AAA bond rating from S&P, which is 7 notches higher than the state of Illinois. And then kind of going around the bottom there is kind of some specific challenges tied to suburban school districts. Whether that's the EBF adequacy gap, whether that's the current pension challenge. So again, the state is supposed to be making contributions to our teachers' retirement system on our behalf. Those payments have over many years lagged what was actuarially calculated, and as a result, that's created additional pensions challenges. And then again, one of the challenges that we already mentioned a little bit, but just that property tax pressure and need to really rely on property taxes in lieu of these state challenges. So with that as the background, the state, Governor Pritzker gave his State of the Illinois budget address last Wednesday. And overall, the term that was used was a maintenance budget. And when we talk for K-12 education, I think overall the impact was about as positive as we could have expected, all things considered. So the governor is recommending $305 million in increased EBF funding and $50 million in additional categorical funding. But again, as we'll walk through in a little bit, that for Indian Prairie, that really represents a minimal amount of new funding, about $500,000 of evidence-based funding dollars, and then really just kind of providing a little bit of stability on the categorical side. Should be noted, this is just the governor's initial address. This does not represent the final budget in any shape or form. That process will continue throughout the spring. Generally, the legislature pushes hard on the May 31st deadline to get that passed. They like to give us a little bit of uncertainty and something to, worry about that Memorial Day weekend every year. So, while we're at graduations and things like that, we can also be checking the state budget, right? So, excuse me, EBF again represents the largest portion of that state budget, representing about 10% of our revenues. Again, we're projecting a growth of about $500,000 as a result of that proposed budget. Shown here, just a quick kind of graphic or explanation of that EBF calculation. Every district in the state is assigned a specific adequacy target. This is based on specific factors to that district tied to student demographics, the enrollment growth. There's an adjustment based on what county in the state you're on to try and factor in wage growth, wage needs, or wage levels relative to other parts of the state. So a very comprehensive but difficult and challenging calculation on that adequacy piece. The second piece of the formula then looks at local wealth, so how much property tax revenue the district's receiving, what that overall EAV or property wealth is, potentially what other local revenues are available. And based on the balance between those two, it assigns an adequacy target to the district. So Indian Prairie continues to be a Tier 2 district. At this point, we're one of the, I would venture we're one of the few districts that stayed in Tier 2 the whole 9 years of evidence-based funding. And really what that puts us in is this sort of middle ground where we're a district where the formula has identified that we have needs that are not being met by our current revenue sources, but we've really not opened up significant additional funding. Again, as shown in the chart, we tend to average growing between 1% and 2% of revenue each year under EBF. And that sort of leads us into sort of the annual look at our comparable districts. Again, this is kind of the greatest hit slide as part of this presentation, so we put it right in the middle of the show instead of having to wait to the encore. But shown here is Indian Prairie compared to our 7 other comparable districts. These are the highest performing unit districts in the state, and you'll see that we continue to spend significantly below our comparable districts. We came in at just short of $17,000 of operating expense per pupil last year. The range of our comparable districts range from $18,500 all the way up to just short of $22,000. Again, what drives that difference? Again, as a reminder for the board and for people who've seen this slide in the past, we are a state that's overly reliant on property taxes. Again, 77% of our revenue comes from property taxes. And we're a state where that state dollars has focused on rising the floor, but hasn't really made its way to Tier 2 districts like Indian Prairie. And so when you look at our EAV per pupil being the lowest of the 8 districts, there's just not a significant amount of state dollars that are going to be able to close that gap when 77% of our revenue comes from property taxes. All these other districts, significantly higher EAV per pupil, all are Tier 3 and 4 districts. The reality is that means they can spend more per pupil than Indian Prairie, and in most cases it also means they have a lower tax rate than Indian Prairie as well. The chart here is a little hard to read, but the actual numbers, Indian Prairie's EAV per pupil for 2023 was $272,000 per student, compared to Naperville 203 on there, which is not even the highest, came in at $371,000. So that's just short of $100,000 more EAV per pupil that our nearest district of the 8 has over Indian Prairie. And so again, this is kind of a different take on that, or sort of a new way to look at that. And what's shown here is those same 8 districts and that same operating expense per pupil number for 2024 that we just saw. Flip the chart from going horizontal to vertical just to make sure everybody's paying attention. And we changed the colors to orange and blue because we know Illinois is going to the Final Four this year, and just wanted to remind everybody of that before the big game against Michigan on Friday. With that said, what you'll see here, the blue is the 2017 operating expense per pupil, and then blue plus orange being the 2024. I want to point out that our operating expense per pupil has grown just short of $5,000 in that 7 or 8 years. Again, a 7 or 8 year period that saw some significant inflation, that saw the challenges tied with COVID. The average amount of growth was $5,200. So again, a Tier 2 district with identified need is still growing at a lower dollar amount than Tier 3s and Tier 4 districts. Even though we're getting some additional state money, those Tier 3 and Tier 4 districts have the property tax base to still outspend Indian Prairie consistently year to year. And so, again, with that challenge, or that lens of the challenge on the EBF side of the table, it's time to shift and look at our categorical funding. And one of the things that I think is slightly encouraging over the past 6 months or so in discussions with state legislators, legislators are starting to recognize that this challenge exists as well. I think there was a mindset or a belief that as long as money was allocated to evidence-based funding at the state level, that represented the #1 priority, and everything was sort of good from a state funding level. And I think there's been a kind of a groundswell of advocacy, which has pointed out the importance of the categoricals over the past couple years. So what's shown here again down the left side is sort of our categorical revenue by year. One thing to remember about the categorical, it does not have a hold harmless or base funding component similar to EBF, so the amount can go down between years. And again, when the state's not allocating new dollars or is under allocating to the categoricals, that possibility becomes more likely. A reminder here, just sort of how the categoricals work. There's 3 specific cost centers that are tied to the categoricals. That is our transportation, both our general transportation and our special education transportation, as well as our outplaced tuition services for our special education students that need that service. We submit claims that tell the state how much we are spending in those areas, and then the state is supposed to fund 80% of those costs. What actually happens is that there's a proration process, which is kind of shown in the middle here, that takes the total cost, takes what was allocated by the General Assembly, and determines how much of those funds can actually be supported by the state. And that's how we then get our actual revenue calculation. So for transportation, this is the same chart we showed last month when we overviewed our transportation services with the board. Again, you will see total cost growing. That's the orange plus the blue category total, compared to what was funded by the state being just the orange piece. And you'll see again, the state funding has stayed relatively consistent as those costs have grown, shifting about $10 million or increasing the need for local dollars towards transportation by about $10 million over that period. The actual award amount between 25 and 26 did grow slightly by about $350,000, but again, as shown in the graph, that was not enough to keep pace with the rising costs. And it's the outplaced tuition or the private facility tuition that has been the real challenge for us with the categoricals this year. We've actually seen a $1.1 million decrease in that categorical amount. And so I just want to spend a minute kind of explaining what happened, and it really ties directly with with the new state law, which was Senate Bill 3606. So shown here kind of in the table is kind of the objectives of that bill. The goal was to expand the availability of that categorical for districts so that districts could receive reimbursement not just for private facilities, but also if they place students in public day schools as well. And so the idea was really to provide parity between the private special education facilities as well as the public facilities. The challenge, I think, the challenge became when additional money was not allocated to the categorical pot. We ended up with an expanded number of districts that had eligibility, expanded number of services that were eligible, but the same dollar amounts allocated to the program, and that significantly increased the proration statewide. For a district like Indian Prairie, which is a large unit district, a district with a lot of just by our size, has the ability to serve some of these students internally and prioritize that. We generally weren't using public day facilities. We were only using private facilities. And so just our mix of students and how we've been able to serve those students or made some programming decisions around serving those students resulted in us really being negatively impacted by that change in the proration percentage. So I think this is an example where I think there are good intentions behind this law. I think in theory we can agree that public and private facilities should be put on the same playing field. But when that legislation came into place and there wasn't additional funding tied to it, this has a negative impact directly for Indian Prairie. And so I just want to take that discussion of all the state revenues and just kind of close comparing it to the growth in the Consumer Price Index since 2018. So again, using 2018 as the base year when evidence-based funding started, you could see that pretty quickly the actual amounts the district received each year started falling below inflation, even as early as 2020 or 2021. That gap has widened and now represents about a $10 million gap. So again, on the property tax side, while we have some protection against the rising costs and Consumer Price Index, we've not seen that on the state side. And again, that's even with our evidence-based funding percentage being 84% and us being considered a Tier 2 district. We spent a lot of time last year talking about federal funding. I think, again, things have relatively stabilized in the federal level. We've come off of the period where we saw significant ESSER dollars tied to COVID relief. Those programs have now expired. We've recently seen bipartisan budget proposals that, again, the language here, stall gutting the U.S. Department of Education. So we've, really gotten to a point where we're looking at more of a consistent budget or no flat budget from prior years, as opposed to where some of the discussion was a year ago, where they were looking at some significant changes to the Department of Education budget. I just want to spend a minute closing with two revenues that sometimes we don't talk about as much. They are smaller. They represent just 1% of our total revenues. But I wanted to talk about them again just to show some of that variance and that's happened over the past 10 plus years. And again, how I think we've proactively managed these revenue sources. The first is the Corporate Personal Property Replacement Tax, or CPPRT. Again, a relatively minor revenue source for the district, but one that did see a significant increase during the period of 2022 to 2024. As an administrative team, we recognized this was likely temporary, and so we really prioritized using those dollars on one-time uses. That included our elementary curriculum refresh as well as some significant capital work. And so that's enabled us to sort of not have to see reductions or reduce expenditures now that those revenues have come back to historical levels. Similarly, we've also seen our investment earnings fluctuate wildly. Based on our cash flow and based on our ability to invest our excess dollars, we are really tied to whatever the short-term interest rate is. So as short-term interest rates increase, we see additional investment revenue. But then as they start to come back lower, as part of the Federal Reserve's decision, as part of the general economic cycles, we do have some exposure as those numbers come down. And so similarly, we recognize the increases in 2023 and 2024 were likely temporary. We use those funds on one-time uses, and as a result, we have a little bit less exposure going forward as those rates start to look to come down. So we're forecasting, our forecast there assumes a 3% rate. That's slightly lower than the current rate of 3.75%. It does seem to be relatively in line and a little conservative of what's being projected by the market for the coming years of 26 and 27. So overall, putting all those revenue sources together, here's a summary of our revenues for the next 5 years. Again, we are projecting total revenue to increase between 2.3 and 2.6%. Again, we could have probably summarized this and gone a little quicker if we just said we think revenue will generally grow by about CPI. But I think, again, it's important to understand what's really driving that growth is that property tax amount. We're expecting state and federal sources to remain relatively flat. So as mentioned earlier, we just want to talk briefly about operating expenses tonight. Our team, just again, seeing the variances we showed earlier, have been working hard to understand our expense trajectory and being proactive in managing that. Currently, our district team is targeting $2 million in reductions from the current budget for next year, looking at doing that with minimizing impact on school-based positions. So again, a lot of the things we talked about earlier with subscriptions, with licenses, working with reducing our hiring average and finding ways to sort of creatively manage that salary line item without necessarily impacting total number of positions. We were able to negotiate and have already had board approval for a transportation service contract at 5% renewal. That is still above CPI, but we're getting closer than where we've been in the last several years. We will go into operating expenses in much more detail when we present the next budget update in May. And then I do, again, want to pivot to a long-term initiative we're working on, which is developing an academic ROI model. So I do want to mention, just kind of as an anecdote, I first discussed this initiative with Dr. Talley actually before I started in this position back in 2020. And so it's only appropriate that we're finally getting around to it, as he's got about 4 months left at the district. But we really do. We continue to revisit the topic, him and I and other administrators every couple months, and never really could find quite the right time to really dive into this. But we really do think this is the right opportunity for a couple reasons. First, as the board knows, we've been hard at work with our IMTSS initiative. And so we think this is really an opportunity to really take advantage of some good work that's being done at both the district and the school level with our IMTSS model. We've really worked to improve our data systems and our ability to use student data in a proactive and meaningful way. So as much as I think we all like to the semi-annual or annual presentation of student data to the board, we realize that has limited ability to impact decisions in real time. So how do we empower our building leaders, our principals, our building leadership teams to really access and use data in real time in a way that's really empowering them to make decisions that impact students and encourage student growth. Third, we did have the opportunity with our COVID relief dollars, not just in this district, but in districts throughout the state and country, to really see some innovative initiatives. And so now we have the ability now, while it's maybe a little bit more challenging of an environment, we have some ideas that we can really evaluate if how effective they were, either for our students in 204 or for students in other districts as well. And then finally, there is that need component too. We think this is the right time, just based on where the budget trends are going, the minimal sources of new revenue we see on the horizon. And so what this concept is, if I had to simplify it into a couple sentences, it was we're really trying to make a direct link between our financial data and how we spend our dollars and our student outcomes. And so really ensuring that any decision about student growth, about new programming, is really tied directly to the student data we're trying to impact, the student outcomes we're trying to achieve, as well as the cost, and that is evaluated in a relative basis. So something could have really good student impact, but if it's a very expensive initiative, that's going to score a little differently than something that could have the same or even lower student impact but comes at a lower cost. And so the ability to evaluate everything we do in the district kind of through that lens, and having a consistent language throughout the district and some consistent methods and consistent priorities, being able to align that with our strategic plan, with our equity plan, and again with our school improvement plans down at the school level as well. Again, I think anytime you start going down this road, people immediately start thinking you're talking about reductions or programs to eliminate. But I think this is also an exciting opportunity to see what programs we need to expand as well. So to be able to see what is working at our schools and be able to take something that maybe has a good anecdotal feeling. People say, oh, I think this is good for kids. I think this is working. But be able to see the data and be able to say, which students is this working for specifically, and can we leverage that and expand it to a broader population throughout the district? So again, just wanted to introduce this concept tonight, so I won't spend much more time on it. We are looking to bring a proposal forward to the board in the next month or so. We're currently evaluating some partners who will help us through this journey, and so if this is something that the board is excited about as we are, we hope we can sort of approve the next steps for this journey in the next couple months. All right, so I do want to close with our non-operating funds this evening. Again, we have two non-operating funds that are maintained by the district, that being our debt service and capital projects funds. These do focus on the long-term investment in district facilities, as that's through the initial investment through the capital projects fund, as well as the repayment of any related financing through the debt service fund. As the board knows, we have very limited recurring revenue for capital investment, so this really does become a discussion about long-term financing and bonds. And for our district, that is really the Safer, Stronger 204 referendum. So we'll cover here shortly also why it's important and how we're tracking the Safer, Stronger 204 referendum funds separately from some other capital funds that we'd accumulated prior to the successful referendum. We showed this to the board and the public before. This is just a high-level summary of the 9 projects included in the Safer, Stronger program. Our program, this is an 8-year capital program, and so this represents investments that are going to be made in our facilities through 2032. This is designed to be the primary or sole source of capital funding for our buildings. And again, just want to reiterate, we've got $420 million of the Safer, Stronger referendum bonds that was approved by our voters. Total project budget of $466 million represents some other capital funds that are kind of come in lockstep with those bond funds. The primary sources of those are bond interest earnings as well as bond premiums earned. Those have the same restrictions as the initial bond funds as well, and so that's why those are restricted for capital and used in the capital program, as opposed to maybe being transferred to operations or used elsewhere. So to date, I'm proud to report that our projects are on time and are coming in at or below budget. I thank the board for all the approvals and things action items we've put forward to the board for the past several months. At this time, we've got we may have a few approvals still coming, but for the most part, we've got our work through this summer and into next fall and even next spring approved. And so we feel really good that we're able to say we are on time and again coming in at or below budget. As a reminder from our presentation in September, all budgets do contain some contingency that's at or above what's being recommended by our architects, engineers, and construction teams. So as projects are completed at budget, we hope that's going to allow that contingency to be released and available to address other priorities throughout the district. A reminder that one of our priorities with our capital investment was to decrease long-term operating expenses and to make our buildings and programs more efficient. So we are still projecting a $2 to $3 million annual savings starting in the 27-28 year. And then a final reminder that all of this is also available at ipsd.org/saferstronger204. And we have started our semi-annual reporting process with the next one coming in the spring. Again, the cadence of that was sort of tied to be in the fall so that we could report on the summer construction season when we're at our busiest, and then also come in the spring as we kind of are gearing up for that construction season, have some bids, have some additional architecture work to show as part of that report. So just shown here is sort of how that Safer Stronger $204 looks over the next 8 years through that November 2032 date. I'll point out one of the things that, again, if we were to compare where we were a year ago, that's maybe a little counterintuitive, is we've actually increased the amount of spend in fiscal year 27 and 28. And so I say we're at or below budget, but we're actually spending a little bit more than we initially anticipated. And that's really kind of a positive feedback loop or a positive result is by coming. One of the things we've prioritized is trying to accelerate work where possible. That's allowed us to reduce sort of some of the cost uncertainty, some of the inflation or rising costs associated with the budget. So by spending it earlier, we actually save money. Again, it looks odd when you see sort of the larger dollar amounts coming forward, but that's actually been to really accelerate the work from a cost savings perspective. Obviously, it also has the benefit of getting the work done earlier and getting those benefits in front of our students and community earlier as well. So this is then the updated forecast for our local capital. So again, much smaller dollars. This includes the $12 million of technology transfer, and again, our plan for spending those dollars over the next 3 years. And then otherwise, we are looking to just hold those dollars, continue to add on them through developer fees and interest, and really save those dollars to be impactful after the referendum ends in November of 2032. And so right now, we're projecting just short of $26 million to be available after the referendum dollars are needing to be spent again in November of 2032. The related debt service here, just shown it with a 5-year window, shows a debt service schedule. Again, we're in line with our commitment to our community for a bond and interest tax rate at or below 37 cents. This schedule includes both current issues, so we've issued 2 of our 4 plans, but also shows anticipated schedules from our future issues. The next bond issue we are planning to do is in June of 2027. And then finally, when you put those together, this really gets to the challenge that we continue to be mindful of, we continue to manage, and we continue to manage towards, and that's how are we going to maximize the impact of capital dollars that can only be spent through 2032, knowing that realistically the bonds tied to that will have repayments past that 2032 date. And so part of that is saving those other capital dollars and allowing them to grow. Some of that is just really working through and being mindful of the repayment structure of those bonds so that we can lower the repayment schedule. That's partially why we were so excited when we received the rating, because ultimately that means a lower interest rate and the ability to repay those bonds faster. And then the final piece, I'll make a connection here to something we talked about a year or so ago, which was the Vision 2030 document. This was a statewide document we were asked to adopt by the Illinois Association of School Boards and Association of School Administrators, which talked about the need for capital funding to come out at the state level. And this really talks to that need that even though we've passed a referendum and we have significant capital dollars in the short term, there's still going to be a need in the future for capital dollars, and we really do need to continue to explore at a state level how districts across the state can access a consistent source of capital funding. And so with that, I'm coming in at about 50 minutes, which is a little longer than I thought I'd be. But I do want to just cover that our next steps will be to continue to update the Board of Education as needed. We do expect to be in front of you with an academic ROI proposal in the next month, and then a preliminary budget presentation in May. In June will be our next updates exclusively on the Safer, Stronger 204 campaign, and we're going to be excited to present our plans for Hill Middle School. Our architecture team has been hard at work with that for a couple months now. Started to have some really good discussions with the school leadership team there, and so I think I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think we're going to be pretty excited for that night in June too. So make sure to mark that one on your calendars. And then finally, we will continue to update the community again at ipsd.org/saferstronger204 and with our semi-annual capital reports. And so with that, I am available for any questions.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Ms. Dumming.
Thank you. I first have to apologize to my seatmate as you were going through one of the slides, just hitting me on some of the challenges that we have, and my seatmate got a little, board member Carubas got a little concerned as I was just thinking about that. So I apologize, board member Carubas, I'm okay. Let's see.
There's an open seat, Justin. if you need to know.
No, he was concerned. No, he was concerned. It's good. It's all good. It's all good. I had so many things here. Let's go to first. Gosh, our ideal fund balance is 25, and as of right now, we're at 34.4. Can you just share, just for the public, and remind me for my edification, what does that mean for us from that differential standpoint? And I don't have the slide that you had on.
It's
I'm
all
sorry.
the way in the front. So
5.
so our board policy is to have a fund balance of revenues of at least 25%. So we are a little above that. That's lower than where we've been last year, and it's lower primarily because of the transfer we made to capital to pay for some specific technology needs. The fund balance represents reserves that the district holds. You could hear someone call them rainy day funds or cash on hand. The reason that 25% is sort of that limit, and why that is really based on a specific calculation that is unique to Indian Prairie, in looking at when we receive our revenues and when we pay our expenses. And one of the challenges that we have, again, this goes to being a district that's very dependent on property taxes, is we receive that first property tax installment on about June 15th. So even though at June 30th we're at 34%, if you go back to June 1st or May 22nd or May 15th, that number is going to be a lot lower. And so the 25% sort of represents the minimum we need to be at June 30th in order to ensure there's not a point in time prior to that where we run out of money or have challenges fulfilling our responsibilities towards our expenditures. So 25% is I think a good number for Indian Prairie. I think it's appropriate to be the number set in board policy. I'll reiterate, it's specific to Indian Prairie. It's specific to our cash flow needs. It's specific to the accounting policies and practices we have. There are districts that maybe measure that property tax payment a little differently, and as a result, their target may look different than ours. But from my perspective, and I think from the board's perspective, the 25% is the right target. We want to stay at or above that 25%.
And that was always something that ever since I've come on the board, that recognition, because you have no idea, but that recognition of the potential for us to have that lapse is something that you and your predecessor have been really good about helping us to understand. So thank you for that. Slide 8. As we talked and looked at property tax, historical and projected, can you share again, just from a standpoint, as we look at that property tax, that revenue increasing, but that percent, share, I know this isn't exactly it, but can you share why we are seeing the burden, it's on another slide, that burden increase over to homeowners versus that commercial side? And I'm not sure if you're able to even answer it, but once we begin to see, well, answer that question first, and then I'll come to the second question.
Sure. So we've on the shift. So again, we've seen significant EAV growth in the district over the past 3 or 4 years. And if you just look at that top line number, it looks like there's, again, 10, 12% EAV growth throughout the district. But that's kind of the just the high level number, the one-page report, that kind of gets reported. When you start looking at the details of what's making up that growth, you see that that substantially all that growth is coming from the residential side. So it's residents, it's homeowners whose properties are going up by 8, 10, 12% a year over the last 2 or 3 years. If you look at our commercial values, they're staying much more level. And that also includes the fact that the Fox Valley commercial area is under a TIF, so that's not growing at all. So all that means is that as the properties over here, the residential properties are growing, and the commercial properties are staying flat, that's going to naturally shift the property tax burden over to those residents or those increasing properties. So this concept or the ability for the burden to shift is not new. It's something that I think we've always kind of talked about, how because we don't have a set rate, because the rate changes every year, that's sort of always been part of the calculation with property taxes. But in the past, we've talked about it like maybe a resident to a resident. Maybe the townhomes are increasing at a different rate than a single family house. Maybe a Will's increasing at a different rate than DuPage. Things like that. I think the last several years, this has been maybe the first time, or maybe pronounced that it's been by property class where we've seen those shifts.
Is this common through? Is that common throughout our state, or?
It's definitely impacting other parts of the state. I will say it's actually impacting some areas more. Specifically, Cook County sees this at a higher level, and that has to do, if we really want to go into the weeds, that goes into some of the equalization factor and some of the challenges specific to Cook. But yeah, this Cook County also puts everybody on a little bit different cycle as far as doing the comprehensive review of EAV. So we've actually, again, it's a real issue here in DuPage and Will County, and it's a real issue for our district. But if anything, it's a lower impact than maybe you're seeing in Cook County right now.
Okay. Slide 11, where we talked about where we began to talk about the I-88 corridor, and I know you indicated that conversations with Naperville, there seemed to be such a large amount of property also near that I-88 corridor on the Aurora side. Are they looking at doing any continued expansion that we might be able to see?
The largest commercial development in Aurora right now is that Cyrus One data center. I don't know if that would be considered part of the corridor that's on Deal and Eola. So it is kind of along 88, but not aware of any other significant discussions with Aurora at this time. They're focused a little bit further west on their new casino. That is not part of our district, unfortunately. Although that is TIF'd, so that'll probably limit some of the ability for I believe that's actually in Batavia school district. So yeah, they've got their focus on that development, and then a few other areas of town. We've other than the data center, we're not aware of significant Aurora development at this time.
Hold for me right here. I do like the AROI conversation that you had, and I don't know whether this truly makes sense, but I almost think of the Sims, our Sims edition, kind of falling into one of those areas where, trying to see the real, that all of a sudden you see value and how that educational investment really has impact on so many different areas. So really interested to see the potential there as those conversations continue. So we'll be very, very interested. So thanks for continuing to look at that and see whether that's something that might be advantageous for us to look at valuation for the district. So those are my questions.
Ms. Gentz.
Well, I'm definitely going to do my part here to keep things shorter and just mostly say thank you for the comprehensive presentation, and also especially on slide 12 with the whole explanation of Block 59. I think for everybody, both on the board and the community, to understand as we're seeing all of these commercial properties pop up, which is absolutely wonderful, understanding it's not going to have an immediate impact. So I want to thank you for that great explanation for all of that. And I, like Board Member Deming, am very excited to hear more about the academic return on investment.
Thank you.
And that's it. That's all I'm going to say on this.
Mr. Karubas.
Okay, page 5, slide 5. Looking at the operation and maintenance budget, something I've been thinking about and talking about for a long time is the fact that we're always seem to be in a deficit with maintaining our buildings, and this gets back to we're borrowing from our buildings at some extent, and so although we're spending a significant amount, 28 in the operations and maintenance budget, you can see that the revenue from that is 18. So we're running a $10 million deficit in that, and we're still not spending enough and to cover, I think, the maintenance on a yearly basis. So in our school facilities audit, there was one when I initially got on the board, and it said that we needed to be spending like 21, I think, and that was like 10 years ago. And there were some years where we spent 6, so we had some very challenging years. So I'm glad that we're getting up to this number, but I think if we were to rerun it, and we might have done it when we were doing the bond referendum, and I just forget the exact number, but I know that we're not spending enough on a yearly basis to fully maintain our building. So there's a deficit in the operation and maintenance, and that's separate and apart from the capital outlays. So that's one of the problems I see. Comments on that?
Sure. We've, I think looking at, of course, you chose one of the slides at the beginning of the presentation, and of course I want to go to one of the slides on the last.
I'll get to the
end
last
of the presentation. But
yeah,
just showed here is the snapshot of what we're doing out of the operations side of the house for capital. And you're right, we are. You'll see there's a 0 for capital outlay on operations and maintenance. So we have shifted all of that capital work into the Safer, Stronger 204 program. So that is an intentional decision to really support the buildings through the capital program. The capital program does include $40 million for general infrastructure. So in addition to some of the sort of higher profile projects we're doing as part of that, we are using those funds to also do our roofs and boilers and mechanical systems and things that maybe we're not taking as many shiny pictures of, but we are doing that work. We're just doing it out of the capital side. Where I think your comment really speaks to is sort of where I ended with sort of that post 2032 look, and that need to ensure that we are positioning ourselves to continue that routine. Again, not exciting, not necessarily viewed as additive sort of capital work post 2032, but to ensure that we have a continuing source, and whether that's bringing it back into the operating side of the house in this budget here, or whether that's finding a way to continue that work on the capital side, that is something we're going to need to discuss post 2032. It's something our team is focused on, and again, even thinking about today about how we can structure the bonds to potentially make that possible, how we can make every last capital dollar last and be put to use in a way that's as valuable as possible to speak to that need. The final thing I'll say, we are running the specific budget here down with a significant deficit this year. That again was intentional. We will shift additional property tax revenues into operations and maintenance next year to ensure that's balanced. But that's really just trying to get the fund balance number for that specific fund more in line with several of the others.
Okay, and then slide 8. This kind of shows our local contribution for each student, and I get there on the 2026 number, looking at the 3 $352 million. And then looking at the 2025 number of $339 million. And that's about a $13 million difference. Divide that by the number of our students, that's about a $500 contribution to each of our students. So our local revenue, our residents and commercial are contributing $500 to each student just on that 1 year, additional dollars. Moving to slide 16. Doing the same thing with the state contribution, 2026 of 43 minus 2025 of 43 gets you to that $500,000, that 500,000. Divided by our student population, that means the state of Illinois is contributing $20 for each of our students in additional funds. So you can see the difference of how our local revenue sources are helping our students' education community further, and the state is not. So I think we're always going to be in Tier 204. It's not going to change. So I think the state level of contribution is not really designed to help our district. I think the education-based funding model is failing our district. I think it goes further and further, that we're going to get to the point where they're going to continue to impose mandates and additional costs on us that aren't going to justify, the revenue that they're giving us. So they're going to give us a cost of $50 per student and give us revenue of $20, which will further burden the local residents because they need to make up for that additional services that they're forcing us to provide. And then moving to slide 35. Takes me a while to get there, longer than you do, I think. So looking at this, we have the 2023 problem, 2033, where we're going to lose funds for capital outlays. And this goes back to kind of advocating for the buildings, and it makes me think of trying to plan ahead so we're not having to be like 203 and struggle with making service cuts for the next year. So we can plan out to 2033 now because we see it coming. And we've talked about maybe state advocacy as being one of the tools. I think we need to look into the penny tax, which is the sales tax that is authorized by the states, where we can get an additional sales tax at the county level. A majority of the schools of the counties have it. They're mainly rural and downstate, because a lot of the school districts are one county, so it's fairly easy to get. In order to pass it, you need a majority of the school districts in that district to authorize it to be on the referendum, and then the voters need to approve it or disapprove it. There's about 130,000 students in DuPage County. So we would need to get districts representing about 65,000. We represent 26,000. They're not all in DuPage County, but that's a significant number. 203, which has a need for revenue, also represents 16,000. Wheaton 200 represents 11,000. I think it's a Tier 3 district.
That's correct.
So I think there's a way where we could come together for advocacy locally, broaden our local to not just our community, but the communities around us. Sales tax is good because it could be paid by non-residents. People living outside DuPage County might pay it. It's bad because it's regressive, so there's pros and cons to any tax. it's good because it can only be used for school facilities. So this would be an amount that would cover some of this 2033 problem and allow us to spend additional on the capital outlays on a year-to-year basis and take that off the burden of our regular annual budget. So I'm very thankful that we passed the referendum, but we still have needs and we still have a future problem we need to plan for. So this penny tax is one of the ways that we can go about doing it. And I looked at what 1% of the sales tax would be in DuPage County, and that's $200 million approximately. And divide that by all the students in DuPage County, and divide that by the number of students that we have, that would be about $1,500 per student of additional revenue on a yearly basis that we could use for our buildings. These are all numbers made up by a volunteer school board member that's not, you know, a student school administrative officer. So they're all kind of directionally right, but not fully accurate. So it's long-term. It's not something that we do right away. We would need to do it in partnership with other districts. I think we have good relationships with those districts, and we can explore it. But you would need to get 10 districts on board, which would be, you know, 50 school board members to vote for it, and then there would be the advocacy at the county level. So it's a big ask, but there's potential there that might be more fruitful than the advocacy at the state level. What are your thoughts on my 10-minute speech?
I do want to go back to something you mentioned that kind of reminded me of a presentation or a point I made a few years ago with evidence-based funding, and that's when you talked about the $500 per student coming from local compared to about $20 from state. I think that's a very powerful way to look at it, and one of the things I'll point out that kind of coincides with that is when we started our evidence-based funding journey in 2018, our district was 78% funded, and now we're 84%. And so I think it is easy for somebody at a state level or somebody to look at that high-level number and say, well, Indian Prairie is making progress. You're going from 78 to 84. What's missing, and what I think Board Member Krubis just pointed out, that our growth has not been because of additional state dollars. It's been because we're putting additional burden, additional student expense on our property taxpayers at a higher rate than the state. And so, to the extent we are seeing progress, again, in Tier 204, to the extent we've seen progress, it's been locally driven. It's not been because of additional state dollars. And so I do think by looking at that number per student, I think that really drove home that concept to me. And so that's something that I think from an advocacy standpoint we should be relaying too, even because again, I think some of the pushback we hear at a state level is, well, 84 is not bad. You start at 78, but we're not making that improvement because of any additional state funding. The sales tax, I think your numbers are generally in line with what I've seen. So pretty good work for some amateur school board calculations. I guess I'll two or three things to point out. I think first mechanically, as a district that's about 60-40 DuPage Will, we have the opportunity for a sales tax in DuPage. We have an opportunity for it in Will. Those would be separate ballots or separate processes, if you will. Our DuPage County students would count towards getting above that 50% in DuPage. Our Will County students would count towards a Will County effort as well. Obviously, we'd be working with a different partnership of districts. You mentioned several of the DuPage ones. The major districts in Will County you'd be working with to do that would include Plainfield, the Joliet area, the New Lenox, Frankfort area, the Lincoln Ways, and some of those feeder. county goes all the way to the state of Illinois, or state of Indiana border, so it also includes some other districts that are a little more rural and a little bit more districts you would think about as actually being a little bit more like a south suburb, if you will. So those are both those would be two separate opportunities working with both counties, and then if successful, the money we receive, although it's based on the number of students from each county, they can be used at any facility in the district. So if it passes in DuPage, for example, and there's a need at a Will County school, you can move those funds between the counties. So just to provide a little bit more perspective on some of the mechanics of that. I would point out that Board Member Krubis, you're correct. It's about 50% of the counties have this, but none of the collar counties do. None of the collar counties have tried putting it on a ballot. So either if the effort was made in either DuPage or Will, it would be at this point that would be considered a little unprecedented. But there are counties that have it on the ballot in this March, including Winnebago County, I believe. So we'll see if it is something that gets talked about and is potentially gaining a little bit of traction in some of the larger districts in the state. I think one of the challenges I think about when I think about those DuPage districts is, a lot of the districts you mentioned, DuPage, including us, have had successful bond referendums in the past 4 or 5 years, but it's like the cycles haven't quite lined up. So like, we passed a referendum in 2024, the same year that Whedon did. We were a few years after Downers Grove, which was a few years after Elmhurst, and now you mentioned District 203 potentially looking at needing some stability on the operating side and potentially, using capital dollars to do that. So it's like everybody's always a couple years off on the timing, and so maybe it is something where it needs to be a 4 to 6 or 8 year process to really say, okay, what can we all do to align our capital schedules so that instead of going out for separate bond referendums kind of across the county, we kind of all do it at once. So I think, again, just some of my initial thoughts based on that. But the Vision 2030 document did envision a statewide sales tax of 1%, similar to what's in Iowa. But you are correct. Currently, the current legislation and current state statute allows it to be done on a county level. And also, does not have to be the full 1%. It can be 0.5%. I think it could be in any increment of 25.25 up to the full 1%.
Lastly, slide 20. I'm a big fan of the Illini colors, especially as it relates to Michigan. But in my house, I also married a Naperville North girl, so I'm seeing these as Naperville North colors as well. So I think next time, we got to go a little more 204 colors.
The blues in the charts are our approved blues, for the record. Those are the same shades as. So there is plenty of Indian Prairie blue on there as well.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay.
And you were right. That is unfortunate that Naperville North has the same
Ms.
colors.
Bostic.
All right, I just have one comment and one question. My question first is, are there any mechanisms currently in place to limit the growth of the cost of special education transportation?
I think I think the growth of the variety of special education services that we have in our district continues to be a challenge. It's something we are looking at. I think there is a definite statewide, potentially national trend on the seeing growth in needs in those services. I think as a district, being a destination district for some of those services also provides it is part of that growth. So it is something that I think as administration we see the same things the board sees, and it feels like every year we're coming back talking about these expenditures growing faster than other areas of the budget, faster than inflation, but that is tied to increased needs and needs we are seeing from our students. I don't know
Are
if
we
Dr.
likely to
Talley
get
looks like he may.
more support statewide for that with increased advocacy?
I think it's hard to say with regards to financial support, either from the federal government through IDA or from the state with regards to that. Mr. Shipley did say the word that I was going to say. We are a destination district for a number of things, special education services being one of them. And it is a plus for us in the sense of what we do in support of students who receive special ed services. But it is also, it creates more issues in the sense of additional classrooms that we have to have, additional staffing and services that we provide. So I do not see necessarily that number going down. The last thing I will say, I do believe that Dr. Igo is looking at this very carefully and examining how we can run our program as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Well, you've led me nicely into my comment then, which is I feel like some of Mr. Shipley's hallmarks are being balanced and being efficient, increasing our efficiencies. So thank you for continuing to do that. And I think it sounds like, based on the teaser of the proposal of the academic ROI, that will be an additional way to increase our efficiencies and really get a feel for how we're serving our students best. So thank you for that.
I'll just add, it was last week before last actually, Dr. Igo, Dr. Lewis Lee, and I were attending a conference, and part of it was looking at special education, looking at the staffing, the services, and so we will continue to look and apply some of the learnings from those conferences.
Okay. Well, thank you. I wanted to go back to slide 11.
Did we hear from Natasha?
Oh, Natasha said she isn't. Okay. She gave me the signal.
I missed it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's good for checking. That's good. Slide 11. So we get this question a lot when, and I know I gave it to you too in the past week, when the Naperville Sun or somebody shows a new development or whatever. We had a very comprehensive study, and that was taken into account, our projections for buildings and everything. So when you look at what you see in front of you, are you seeing anything new that was not something that we projected or that causes us concerns?
On the residential side, we've had collaborative discussions with both cities on anything that's shown as the residential. They are our student generations materially in line with what we used during our last boundary study. We continue to follow that closely, and so I don't see anything that has that has any particular concern from a student generation standpoint. I think we're in a little different position as a district than we were maybe 10 years ago. We have seen sort of our enrollment come down slightly. We've seen sort of the peak from student growth coming out of our single families has kind of waned, and so I do think that in total our enrollment's lower than maybe it was 8 or 10 years ago. We're also well aware that just student generation, just births nationwide and across the state continue to kind of decline. They dropped the first year during COVID and haven't really recovered, and so I don't know that we're in a position where we have as many concerns about capacity and being able to serve students as maybe we have in the past. With that said, again, we still evaluate each project. We still make sure that that we can serve those students. We still, make sure that it's going to generate adequate property taxes to support the students it generates. We still push both cities and to develop commercially where possible. We look for, to the extent residential's necessary, we want to make sure that that's done in a way that supports commercial and enables future commercial growth as opposed to potentially displacing commercial growth. And so those are all discussions we're having pretty much on a regular basis with both cities.
Yeah, thank you, because this topic comes up a lot, and I want to share that we are continually monitoring that. We did a very comprehensive study of projections of property in the area, and also student generation of different housing types that you continue to test and make sure that it is consistent with what we had been projecting through our studies, and nothing has become some kind of, like, all of a sudden one-bedroom apartments generate lots more students or whatever. So, yeah. Let's go to slide 17. Okay, I just want to repeat this because for me it was a very striking data point, the chart on the right, about the average property value, the EAV of 203 versus 204. And 203 is at 372,000 average property value, and ours is 272, so 30% difference in property values. And I think a lot of people find that shocking, and I want to keep repeating that kind of information for everyone. Okay, let's go to slide 21. Okay, so you talked about the MCAT and how the objective is to fund 80%. So what percent are we at?
With this year, with this proration number on specific on this on the private facility tuition, we are closer to about 40%. I could get that. I could get that. What the statewide proration was, or what was published, but just my kind of rough estimate's about 40%.
Right. So we're at 40%, and then if you go to the next slide, this one to me was important. There's several charts that you have that shows like CPI and what the CPI is every year, and then it shows you evidence-based funding, which is not keeping up with the CPI, and also MCAT on top of that is not funded at 80%, but 40%, and our costs in that category are growing. But this chart also shows you that separation continues to grow. And so when you're talking about shifting burden to local resources, it is not only like the commercial property versus residential, but also a chart like this that shows you the difference in what we're receiving at the state level, which is 14% of our budget, versus the costs that we are incurring. And then on top of that is unfunded mandates that come through the state, which we always try and object to. So it's a continued struggle looking at our revenue that we're getting and where we have to have that come from. And I did like the $20 versus $500. That was a really clear kind of explanation of what we're seeing. Everyone, I think, expressed an interest in the AROI. I think that that's an interesting discussion and concept that would be welcomed. And I think it's a challenging thing to do, though, where you kind of try to understand how something like a tool or a piece of software helps a student evolve from A to B, because there's so many different things impacting that student. So I'm kind of curious about what that would look like. But you and I had a good discussion this week, and I expressed a great interest in that. So I think that's helpful. In the media, they were talking about possibility of a social media tax, and that would be directed at schools. Have you heard anything about that, or what that might look like? Or
I've not. So I'm looking. I offhand, is that something at the state level? Do you know, or something?
It was Pritzker.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know anything about that?
No, I haven't. So until we see anything, I don't think we really can speak about it.
Okay, I was getting kind of a little bit excited that we might have something that goes on here. Also, on the sales tax that was discussed previously, remind me, like, didn't we have a discussion about that, I think, with Will County at some point, like several years ago, and it came very close to...
Yes, of the two counties, Will County has come the closest. We did, Indian Prairie's Board of Education did approve a resolution that would put it in on the ballot. I would guess that was 2018 or 2019. But ultimately, it fell short. There were a few districts that we were hoping would support it that ultimately didn't support it. So
it fell short from being on the ballot.
From being on the ballot,
Not
yes.
that it got on the ballot and then fell short.
Correct. So two steps. Step one is getting it on the ballot. Fell short of there. Step two would be once it's on the ballot, it would take 50% of the voters voting in that election to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we should pursue and look at again in both counties, and it might be something that helps address. I know when we looked at Block 59, there was a lot of concern about the 1% sales tax that was given to that development, not given, but will be charged to support that development. And when they did studies, like the vast majority of people that visit those restaurants and things are not from our area. So it's like even though it's a tax burden on maybe the wrong set of people, economically, it isn't hitting our local population as much as.
Yeah, and with the state, one is Board Member Krubis mentioned a lot of the counties that enacted it initially were sort of 1 or 2 district rural counties, and that made it sort of an appealing solution relative to a property tax referendum. Also, I think all our big college towns passed it, with maybe the exception to Calb. So, Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois is located, they know that they're getting a lot of out of county people, including myself, come down there and pay that tax. So that's sort of, that was part of the appeal. I think one of the things that's really interesting working with municipalities is again, the amount of data they're now receiving on, who buys what and goes to what stores. It would be relatively easy, or at least easier than it maybe was 5 or 10 years ago, to really be able to dial in what would that impact be to a DuPage resident versus an out-of-county resident, or what would that impact of a sales tax be versus a property tax revenue. So it is something that if there's an appetite for it at a county level, I think that the data would support or be able to show some of that.
Well, that's it. I know it's challenging. I mean, we have the CPI having costs go up, and other things causing costs and expenses, and so we have 80% of our expenses are associated with our staff, and so we have to look for ways to make this work. And I appreciate all the effort that you put into looking for solutions here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, last item is legislative advocacy and Board of Education update.
President Donahue, the only thing that I wanted to mention is that we are coming close to the time frame for us to submit a proposal for IASB in November, and I sent out an email to everyone. Heard back from one board member in addition to you, so I will share with everyone. It's along the lines of some of the things that I had shared already, sort of around a particular topic. So Board Member Grover sent over something that I think would be very, that we might be able to sink our teeth around as far as maybe a topic. And so I'll share that, and we'll go from there and look to pull something together and get it submitted, hopefully the first weekend in March. The deadline again is March 15th, so share with everyone.
Okay, anything else? No? I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. I won't.